It is the night of Sunday, the 26th of June, 2011. The city is Macon, Georgia. The street is Georgia Avenue. The building is a renovated 3-story residence converted into law student housing for Mercer University's Walter F. George School of Law. On the second floor, in apartment 212, a 27-year-old woman named Lauren Teresa Giddings is finishing a long evening of studying for the Georgia bar examination. She graduated from Mercer Law 1 month earlier. She is preparing for the bar in late July. She has, by every account from her classmates, the routine of a person who is going to pass. At approximately 11:47 that evening, Lauren picks up her phone, opens a text thread that has been continuous between her and her mother for years, and sends a text. The text says, paraphrased here so as not to reproduce the family's private words, that she loves her mom and that she will call her in the morning. Her mother, Karen Giddings, who is in Maryland, sees the text and does not reply immediately. The pattern between them is well established. The mother typically replies in the morning. Lauren typically goes back to her books. Within approximately 40 minutes of that text, Lauren Giddings is dead. This is not the case where a body is found in a forest a year later. This is not the case where a phone signal pings from the bottom of a river. This is not the case where the search takes a decade. This is the case where the victim is killed in her own apartment by a neighbor she trusted enough to leave her door unlocked for, in a window so small that the difference between alive and dead is the time it takes to read the text and put the phone down. The killer is a man named Stephen Mark McDaniel, 25 years old, also a recent Mercer Law graduate, also a resident of the same building. He has been her classmate for 3 years. He lives in the apartment directly across the hall. He pleaded guilty in 2014 to malice murder and is serving a sentence of life without the possibility of parole at Georgia State Prison. This is the timeline of how Lauren Giddings went from a text to her mother at 11:47 on a Sunday evening in June in a law student apartment in Macon, Georgia, to a missing person by Wednesday morning, from a missing person to a homicide investigation by Saturday afternoon, from a homicide investigation to a suspect on local television by Saturday night, and from a suspect on local television to an arrest by the following Tuesday. The timeline is the case. Pay attention to the minutes. Lauren Teresa Giddings was born on the 3rd of August, 1983. She grew up in Bel Air, Maryland, the older of 2 daughters in a close family. Her father is Bill Giddings. Her mother is Karen Giddings. Her younger sister is Caitlin. Lauren attended Goucher College in Baltimore, where she graduated in 2006 with a degree in women's studies and Spanish. She worked for 2 years before deciding on law school. She enrolled at Mercer University's Walter F. George School of Law in Macon, Georgia, in the fall of 2008. She graduated in May of 2011, 3 years and 1 month before her 27th birthday. The decision to attend Mercer, rather than a school closer to her family in Maryland, had been a deliberate one. Lauren had wanted the experience of living in the South. She had wanted, friends said, to be in a place where the weather was different, the pace was different, and the food was different. She had taken to Macon. She had taken to the law school. She had made deep friendships among her classmates. She was, at the time of her death, in the small 5-week window between law school graduation and the bar examination. She had a job lined up after she passed the bar. She had a plan to move closer to home. She had, in the most concrete sense, a future. The afternoon of the 26th was a study day. Lauren's schedule, as documented later in interviews with classmates and reconstructed by investigators, was approximately as follows. At noon, she was at the Mercer Law Library. She had been studying with 2 classmates. One of them, Christopher Belton, would later become the last person who is documented as having been in extended contact with her by phone. At approximately 3 in the afternoon, she returned to her apartment on Georgia Avenue. She ate a small meal. She continued studying. At approximately 7 in the evening, she ran an errand. She went to a nearby public supermarket. She returned home. At approximately 9 in the evening, she resumed studying. The study material she was on that night related to commercial paper and secured transactions, two of the most demanding bar exam topics. Her notes from that evening were later recovered from her apartment. At 11:47 in the evening, she texted her mother. After texting her mother, Lauren made a phone call. She called Christopher Belton. The call lasted approximately 20 minutes. During the call, she and Christopher discussed, mostly, bar preparation. They talked about a study group meeting that was planned for the following morning. They talked about a recent class memorial event that had been held earlier that month. They talked, briefly, about the building they both lived near, and about a particular neighbor across the hall, from Lauren, whom Lauren had described to several friends in recent weeks as making her uncomfortable. The call ended at approximately 12:07 on the morning of the 27th of June. Christopher Belton has stated, in court testimony and in subsequent interviews, that Lauren said, paraphrased here, that she was going to read for another 20 minutes and then sleep. Christopher said goodnight. The call ended. He went to sleep. The exact time of the killing is not part of the public record in the form of a single timestamp. The plea statement made by Stephen McDaniel in 2014, however, established that he had entered Lauren's apartment in the early hours of the 27th, that the killing occurred in the apartment, and that he had used the master key access available to him through informal arrangements with the building management as a long-term tenant, who had occasionally helped with tenant lockouts. The forensic estimation, established at trial through medical examiner testimony, placed the killing in a window of approximately 12:30 to 1:30 on the morning of the 27th. In the practical sense, this means that within approximately 40 minutes of Lauren ending her phone call with Christopher Belton, the killing was over. Within approximately 90 minutes of her sending her mother that text. The cliffhanger that closes part 1 is what almost no audience expects when the case is described in title card format. The case is not a long missing person case. The case is a sub-hour homicide that took a week to be discovered. The case turned not on what happened in the killing window. The case turned on what happened in the days that followed. The morning of the 27th, Lauren was scheduled to attend a study group meeting at 9. She did not arrive. The study group, which knew Lauren as reliable, attempted to call her. Calls went to voicemail. By the afternoon, the absence had become a question. Christopher Belton, who had been on the late call the night before, attempted to call her several times. He stopped by her apartment. He knocked. There was no answer. He left. The day passed. Lauren's mother in Maryland, who had received the 11:47 text the night before, called Lauren in the late afternoon. The call went to voicemail. The mother left a message. By Tuesday morning, the worry had begun to organize. Christopher Belton called Lauren's family in Maryland. The conversation, which was reconstructed in trial testimony, established that Lauren had not been heard from in roughly 36 hours. Lauren's parents called the Mercer police. The Mercer police drove to the building. A welfare check was conducted on Tuesday afternoon. Officers knocked on Lauren's door. There was no answer. They called the building manager. They asked for entry. The building manager, citing the privacy policy of the residential service, asked them to return with appropriate paperwork. The officers left. Tuesday evening passed. By Wednesday morning, the family had escalated. Bill and Karen Giddings drove from Maryland to Macon. The drive took approximately 12 hours. They arrived in Macon late Wednesday afternoon. They went directly to the Mercer police. They asked for an immediate welfare check with formal authorization. The Mercer police returned to the building. The building manager was now present. The door was opened. Inside the apartment, the officers found Lauren's purse, her keys, and her phone. They did not find Lauren. The officers did not, at this initial entry, recognize the scene as a homicide scene. The apartment was not visibly disturbed. The bedroom door was closed. The apartment had been, by appearance, tidied. What officers did notice was that the bathroom showed signs of recent intensive cleaning. The cleaning agents in the bathroom were not the household products that would normally be present in a graduate student apartment. The smell of bleach was strong enough to be flagged in the initial report. By Wednesday evening, the case had been reclassified from a missing person welfare check to a suspicious circumstance investigation. The Bibb County Sheriff's Department was now involved. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation was contacted. The discovery came on Saturday afternoon, the 2nd of July, 2011, 6 days after the killing. A maintenance worker at the Georgia Avenue building, conducting a routine garbage round, opened a dumpster at the rear of the property and noticed an unusual smell. He looked inside. He saw what he saw. He called the police. The torso of Lauren Giddings was inside the dumpster. The other portions of her body were not in the dumpster and would, in the years that followed, never be recovered. The plea statement made by McDaniel in 2014 acknowledged that the body had been dismembered after the killing, but did not provide a complete account of the disposal of the additional remains. The Saturday discovery was reported by local Macon television stations within hours. The cliffhanger that closes Part 2 is the local news event that broke the case. On Saturday evening, the 2nd of July, a Macon television reporter named Frank Malloy, working for the local CBS affiliate, attended the press scene at the Georgia Avenue building. He approached residents who were standing outside the building. One of those residents, Stephen Mark McDaniel, agreed to be interviewed on camera. What McDaniel said in that interview and how he said it became the moment that changed the case. The interview McDaniel gave to the Macon television reporter was approximately 3 minutes long. McDaniel described in his own words that a body had been found, that he had known Lauren, that he was a fellow Mercer Law graduate, and that he was, like the rest of the building, in a state of shock. What was unusual about the interview was the moment when the reporter asked McDaniel, on camera, what he had seen of the police activity at the building over the past several days. McDaniel was answering the question and, mid-sentence, was informed by the reporter or by a police officer present at the scene, depending on which version of the public account is referenced, that the body had been identified as Lauren's. McDaniel's reaction, which was captured on camera, was a sudden physical collapse. He stepped backward. He bent forward. He covered his mouth. The collapse in itself was not unusual. The interview in itself was not unusual. What was unusual was that the timing of McDaniel's reaction did not match the standard reaction of a neighbor learning of a death. The reaction read, to several investigators who watched the interview later that evening, as the reaction of a person who already knew. The investigators did not, on the basis of the interview alone, have probable cause for arrest. They did, however, have a person of interest. The Bibb County Sheriff's Department placed McDaniel under surveillance on Sunday, the 3rd of July. The surveillance was not aggressive. McDaniel was followed at a distance. His vehicle was logged when he moved. His acquaintances were noted. Across the same day, investigators began canvassing the building. They interviewed every other tenant of the Georgia Avenue building. They asked about McDaniel's relationship with Lauren. The picture that emerged was consistent. McDaniel had been a quiet but somewhat unsettling presence to several female residents of the building. He had been observed, on multiple occasions, watching female residents from his apartment. He had attempted to speak with Lauren in the laundry room and the parking lot in the months before her death, and Lauren had described, to at least 3 classmates, that the encounters had made her uncomfortable. This pattern, taken together with the master key access McDaniel had had on at least one prior occasion, the absence of forced entry at Lauren's apartment, and the proximity of his apartment to hers, gave the investigators what they needed. A search warrant was issued for McDaniel's apartment on the morning of the 5th of July, 2011. The search recovered, from the apartment, items that were inconsistent with McDaniel's public account of the previous week. The search recovered cleaning agents that matched the cleaning agents found in Lauren's apartment. The search recovered communications and personal effects that suggested an obsessive interest in Lauren over a period of months. McDaniel was arrested at the apartment that morning. He was charged with burglary on the day of the arrest. The murder charge was added within 48 hours, after the prosecutor's office reviewed the search return. The arrest was 9 days after the killing. The case was, in the legal sense, no longer a missing person case. The case was a homicide with a named suspect. The case did not go to trial. After approximately 3 years of pretrial motions, defense changes, and competency evaluations, McDaniel pleaded guilty to malice murder and aggravated assault on the 18th of March, 2014. The plea was negotiated to remove the death penalty as a possibility in exchange for cooperation on the question of where the additional remains had been disposed of. McDaniel's cooperation on that question was partial. The Bibb County Sheriff's Department conducted searches based on McDaniel's indications of several disposal sites in and around Macon. The searches did not recover the remaining portions of Lauren's body. The sentence was life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus consecutive sentences on the additional charges. McDaniel was 28 years old at sentencing. He was transported to Georgia State Prison in Reidsville, where he remains. The cliffhanger that closes Part 3 is what the plea did not provide. It did not provide the rest of Lauren. It did not provide the full account of why. McDaniel, at the plea, made a brief allocution that the court reporter recorded, but that the family has chosen not to amplify. The allocution was not, by the family's subsequent public commentary, an explanation. It was a procedural acknowledgement. The case was closed in the courtroom. The case was not closed in the family. There is a generation watching this video that has at some point thought, on the way home from a study session at 1 in the morning, about whether the apartment is safe. The generation has thought about the locks, about the door, about who has keys, about whether the neighbor across the hall is the kind of person to leave a hallway light on or to look out the peephole when he hears the elevator. The generation has thought about all of these things in a way that the generation before it did not have to think about. Because the generation before it lived in a country with fewer rentals, fewer master key arrangements, fewer informal lockout help relationships, and fewer people in the next apartment over whose background was unverifiable. Lauren Giddings did not have a chance to act on what the generation knows now. Lauren had told classmates that the neighbor made her uncomfortable. The classmates had taken her seriously. The classmates had not, however, suggested that she document the discomfort, raise it formally with the building management, change the locks, request a transfer to a different apartment, or take any of the steps that would have moved the discomfort from a private observation to a procedural record. The generation watching this video should learn from Lauren's case to act on the discomfort, not in panic, not in a way that disrupts ordinary life, but in the small procedural ways that are now possible. Tell the building manager, on email, in writing, with a date. Document the encounters in a log. Request a lock change, which most reputable rental services will accommodate. Ask whether the master key arrangement covers the apartment. Verify the neighbor's name and background through public records. These are not steps that prevent the rare extreme outcome with certainty. These are steps that move the rare extreme outcome from a case where the victim left no record of her concern to a case where the victim left a paper trail that the investigation can pick up before the killing. The paper trail does not save the victim in every case. The paper trail saves the victim in some cases. Some is the available margin. The Giddings family, in the years since the conviction, has supported a number of safety initiatives in the Macon area, particularly programs aimed at law student housing. The university has changed its tenant arrangements at the Georgia Avenue building. Master key access policies in Macon area student housing have been substantially restructured. Lauren Giddings was 27 years old. She was 34 days from sitting for the Georgia bar examination. She had a job lined up. She loved her mother. She texted her mother on a Sunday evening in June at 11:47 and told her, in the casual nightly way a daughter tells a mother, that she loved her and that she would call in the morning. She did not get to call in the morning. The mother got the text. The mother, by every account in the years since, still has the text on her phone. That is what Lauren Giddings asks of us, that we read the text, that we read the timestamp, that we understand that the difference between alive and dead in this generation can be the time it takes to put the phone down, and that we use the small procedural tools we now have to widen the timestamp by even a few minutes. In the cases where minutes matter, if you have a case you want covered on this channel, the email is in the description. The next episode of Last Known Frame drops on Friday. It is the case of a college freshman who walked home from an off-campus party in California in 1996, and the two witnesses whose accounts of that walk, 26 years apart, finally aligned.